He wanted to also pretend that he was the group's chosen sort of divine leader.
Francesca Fiorentini of the Bitchuation Room with Francesca Fiorentini talks about Tulsi Gabbard in this video and asks whether or not she may be in a cult, looks a little bit at Gabbard's history, and now has been, Trump's appointee for the Director of National Intelligence. That's a pretty important job. So we're going to watch this video together. I'm going to have some comments along the way, and then I want to know what you think in the comments section, but let's check it out.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh.
Picked to be Director of National Intelligence. Now, I knew a lot about Tulsi in the way that she sort of like capes for, authoritarians, whether they are, Bashar al-Assad or Modi. She's a raging Islamophobe. She says she's Hindu. She's against forever wars, but really loves the ones that kill Muslims. And she's going possibly be the the head of the National Intelligence, administration. And I am wondering, I didn't know this about her, but there's been new reporting about her part in the Science of Identity Foundation, which I guess her parents were both part of, and that she grew up in.
She did, yeah. So she's been a member of the Science of Identity since childhood. It's run out of Hawaii by an ex-Hare Krishna guy named Chris Butler, who separated out from ISKCON in the 1970s. He wanted to start his own gig. He had trouble with, the leadership. He wanted to also pretend that he was the group's chosen sort of divine leader. He's married to a yoga apparel guru named Y. Lana, who some listeners or viewers might be familiar with. Like she's very she's basically the image of fitness on the back of every VHS tape that was produced on yoga in the 1980s.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a big sort of wellness connection there as well. And as far as we know, Gabbard remains a devout follower of Chris Butler. We've got a recent video clip of her attending a veneration ceremony in 2018 where everybody is venerating his photograph. Her parents were part of his original group, and Mike Gabbard, her dad, has been a Hawaii state politician since 2002.
Yeah.
Mostly known for being an openly homophobic jerk, which is right in line with Butler's views. Butler is completely obsessed with sexuality. So Science of Identity is kind of a typical high demand situation where it's secretive and Butler demands a lot of obedience and he dictates diet choices, relationships, employment, and stuff like that.
Ugh.
Children are homeschooled or they're sent to Science of Identity boarding schools. Gabbard actually spent a chunk of her own schooling at an ashram school in the Philippines, and former students of that school described that environment as, quote, almost prison-like and traumatizing.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And so she really belongs to a group that teaches strict adherence to their, ISKCON style interpretations of Hindu scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita. Gabbard was sworn into Congress on a copy of it, but you got to understand that it's not just the Bhagavad Gita; it's the Bhagavad Gita as interpreted by Chris Butler. And that means that there's a huge focus on personal purity and detachment from the material world, but also an obsession with demonizing homosexuality and traditional gender roles and women being subservient to men. And so, Gabbard's anti-trans position is pretty unsurprising. But you're flagging that, what does this mean for her attitudes towards Islam? And on one hand, she has this language where she preaches a kind of universal ecumenism. But, she has also been very supportive of Assad. I'm not sure why. I don't really understand the politics of her authoritarianism fetish, except that it kind of mirrors the structure of her religion. And Assad also was not Sunni and therefore may be a lesser danger in her view. I'm not sure. But, she did things like she pressed Obama to highlight the dangers of radical Islamism over any other threat to world security. Like if he didn't say that, then he wasn't really taking care of business.
Right.
And of course, she's an all-out hawk on Israel. So yeah, that's the picture. I don't think that we're getting a clear sort of sense of Tulsi Gabbard outside of the context of Chris Butler's views on sexuality and Hinduism and Islam.
What do you mean? Well, they're.
You know, what's really interesting to me, obviously your religion isn't the core thing, and whether or not you grew up with parents who enforced strict, none of that is really germane. But I do think if you talk about this sort of cult-like worldview, right, this kind of cult-like ideology, I think that's germane, especially if you're being vetted for director of national intelligence, right? I mean, this has real-world implications. So on the one hand, I think it's like, hey, man, let's not focus on anyone's religion. But on the other hand, you say, like with Amy Coney Barrett, you go, so, there's religion, and then there's this kind of niche sect stuff that gets pretty archaic and pretty, like, out there. And I think if it's enough outside of the mainstream, it's valid to really drill in and ask some pointed questions about that.
I think I mean I'm sure she's influenced by many things, but given I mean my background is in investigative journalism and cults and high demand groups, and when people grow up in these organizations and they don't leave and they don't recover and they don't go through a period of sort of self-evaluation and re-identification and figuring out how they're going to relate to the normal world or the regular world, they are there. That's who they are. And if you get this sense of her as somebody who's always photographed or always depicted as almost like an icon in a temple, I mean that's her husband. His name is Abraham, and I think he's part of the group as well. I don't know how long he's been part of it, but there's this way in which she is presented as a mouthpiece for the organization in the Science of Identities members' terms. Like that's how they speak of her. And I think that if you get this sense that you don't quite know what her politics are and how coherent they are, it's because the politics of Hindu nationalism are actually incoherent. They're not. You're not gonna square them with reality. They're gonna turn out to be, there's gonna be right turns and left turns, and you're not really going to understand what's going on because the devotion is actually to a vision of Krishna that Chris Butler has.
God, that's so terrifying. And yet it dovetails. I mean, sort of like Zionism dovetails with, Christianity in a disgusting, bizarre way. It's like Hindu nationalism also. It's like we're all in this against the gays and the Muslims. And that just like, great. We can agree until we fight.
Yeah, and I think that, I just think that the main takeaway is that it's not. I don't know how she's going to conduct herself as DNI, but what I really want to know is, how often is she going to be talking to Chris Butler on the phone, and what color is the phone going to be? Is it going to be the actual DNI phone, or is it going to be her personal cell phone, or Yeah, there's a deep influence there, and I think there's more to be learned about it.
Joe KNYC on YouTube says Krishna ain't say that.
Krishna ain't say that. Words of wisdom. That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that about Tulsi Gabbard's background. I mean, Trump sure knows how to find the outliers, doesn't he? And we're moving into a phase where these people are going to start being vetted. So get ready for that circus. Let me know what you think in the comments.